I'm
Should.
here.
It's one of those days that's a bank holiday. It always worries me when they've decided to give us 3 weekend days instead of two.
Why does it worry you?
I don't know.
That was a trick question, Bridget.
I know.
I do
I
enjoy
know.
it.
Well, I know what the answer is.
Well, they have more time to finagle the system over 3 days. And
Well,
because
yeah. I
people,
mean, what
go
are they
ahead.
at? 200 billion right now of overnight. The Feds, and then the Feds came out last week and said, okay, well, we're just, not going to let them ask us for what they need every night. Oh, you need 30 billion tonight. Okay, we'll stick that into the banks in the US. And then they came out and said, no, we'll just, continue to rehydrate you, as needed for God knows how long. And think about like how, I mean, we know that the fiat is fake. It's not helpful to anyone when other people have power to create currencies and commerce, and there's nothing, and we have to, that's what we get paid in and everything else, and it's not good for us, it's not good for our economy. Think about like even for their standards, putting, the ones and near zeros across, because there is no money being moved. They keep saying, oh, the printing of money. They can't print any money. That's why they're moving ones and zeros from the Federal Reserve Bank to the, individual banks in the US. And, it's just so ludicrous. But what it does is it makes the value of the fiat even more worthless than it already was, especially the US fiat. I mean, you got all these countries that have moved away from fiat, and stockpiling gold and coming up with, gold-backed cryptocurrencies that they're all exchanging with, behind the market scene. And the US is still like just, dragging along.
But they've even
Money.
inflated the value of the minerals and other things of that nature. Because
Yeah.
isn't there less
Well, it's
silver
the paper.
actually available instead of gold?
Well, but a lot of people have bought a lot of this stuff up, but there are people that are still holding and buying paper certificates. But if you buy a paper gold certificate for $50,000 or whatever you buy, if the US dollar collapses, you'll never get that solid gold because what you bought was a paper that said that you
Hmm.
have gold on it. So they've overvalued um, a lot of the gold and silver on the market, and people, have bought up um, a lot of the, actual physical. I mean, there are a lot of people that are holding physical these days, as well as countries.
Well, that only makes sense, actually.
Yeah, but the U.S., we just haven't really still, you know, I don't know. It's just such a jumbled bunch of, it's hard because it's like, what do you do? Do you allow another country to come in and invade the U.S. to take down their government and the cabal? I mean, what do you do? I mean, what do you do? How do you do it? Because Americans will freak out. They're going to freak out no matter what happens,
Right. Well, that's so true.
and they're going to freak out when there's no money and there's no welfare and there's no food stamps and there's no pensions, there's no Social Security, which could happen any day now.
Yeah, but I can't have fear about it.
The what?
Can't carry fear about it.
No, I'm good to go. I've got lots of food stockpiled. I've been working on this for 2 years. Um, I'm so far prepared that I'm just not worried, pretty much about it. I just keep chopping wood and carrying water and keep going to school and keep
Digging
getting my
holes.
certifications and keep doing the work I do. And that's it. That's it.
That's all you
All
can.
you can It's all you can do. It's sort of interesting going across country as I am because I'm getting to see now all the places are both the same and uniquely different. It's funny because everywhere there's a Walmart, there seems like there's a Dollar Tree next to it, and KFC and Taco Bell on the flanks, and you see the same things, but they're all positioned differently in the town. So I think that each town's separate reality is the same reality as each other town's separate reality, and it's just a cosmic illusion that we're getting anywhere.
Well, it's a spell because you have all those corporations with sigil logos, which are, magical spells to control and manipulate fields of energy. And they all have those kinds of logos. And those logos are just, sending out, it's like the way I look at the money. Whoever created the money, created a lot of the symbols on the money, the way that they look, the color of the money, what's on the money, like say the US dollar fiat. So whoever controls the magical principles of the sigils and the rituals of those sigils controls the money system. And it's interesting because there was a time period where you would see all of a sudden, things coming out in the news saying, oh, the average millionaire in the United States has risen. There are more millionaires now. And then all of a sudden you'll see like the $5 bill change, and then now it has a purple 5 on it because, they changed once people started to figure out how to use and make that money, then they changed the actual sigil magic on it, which is blocking them back out, on an energetic process. So it's just kind of interesting. But yeah, when I went across, Lenny and I were talking about, he was living in Durango, and Lenny and I had met each other like a long time before this, but it's when Lenny and I first really got to know each other. You know what I mean? Like really kind of our friendship super budded, and we started collaborating on things and, sharing information and blah, blah, blah. And I was in my car crisscrossing the United States, not because I wanted to, but because, I had to. And, I would get stuck in rest stops and stuff in my van and be living in my van until, like I could either make the money or, get donations to get out of there. So it was kind of a crazy, super crazy period of my life. I call it like the 5 months, the vision quest from hell for 5
Right.
months. And it was pretty intense. And I drove through probably a lot of the same areas that Lenny has come through. And was, it's kind of an interesting thing. And then I ended up going up once I hit, North Carolina area. I stayed there for about 2 weeks with a friend of mine, got her some medicines that she needed because she had skin cancer that turned to melanoma and she didn't want to go to the doctor. So I brought her stuff cross country. 2 things in particular that actually it took a year, but it cured everything.
Cool.
And then I drove up to New York area, and then I came across Pennsylvania, and then the top. Kind of coming into the wintertime. It's about the same time frame actually that Lenny's crossing. But it was a really interesting thing. And once you get to some of these toll roads, like up more north, where these toll roads, like it's really difficult. This is the part that really shook me, was how controlled our, one of the visual control methods. And I was kind of glad that I did this trip because, all in all, it was kind of haphazard trip. I wanted to go study with a man named Babudo, Shoshone medicine elder. I wanted to learn how to do these earth healing ceremonies he was doing. And I had been following him for 2 years, and I had this opportunity that was very small. And so I had to, leave here immediately, go up there. So it all started with like 10 days of ceremony and all of this other stuff, this 5 months from hell that continued on. But the 5 months of hell were just, being on the road, and just a lot of things were pretty terrifying. I had some pretty intense situations, and, I was really astonished by these toll roads that are set up kind of more on the northeast that go across, like whole states, where it keeps the small towns from getting any kind of commerce, even like buying gas. And each one's like 5 to 10 miles. There's like a little rest stop, and it all has the same thing. It has a Starbucks, it has like a restaurant, it has the same kind of gas station. And it keeps you from, being able to go down into the small towns. And then, it costs you quite a bit of money. I think on that trip going through the east and the northeast and then coming back across, like I had $350 worth of toll fees.
Jiminy Crickets.
Yeah. But there was just no way to avoid the toll. And then I ended up staying in the rest stops. I mean, you could kind of like sort of stay in the rest stops on those toll areas, kind of, 3 to 4 days. So, I know that I'd be heading off the toll. I didn't have the money for the toll. And I would literally, have to rely on people to help me to get, through the toll. Because they stop you and you have to pay for it. It's not like you can just be like, can you send me a ticket or I'll pay you later.
Right.
And the other thing too that really, I mean, there were some beautiful, beautiful places in the South and the East, like Tennessee's gorgeous, Kentucky, unbelievable. I went there during the fall. Oh my God, beautiful. And then Pennsylvania, of course, the Amish country, coming through all of that is just some of the most beautiful area I think I've ever seen. So, I mean, there were some real highs and there were some real lows, and I got piggybacked a lot. There were lots of graveyards everywhere, like super old graveyards, and I kind of, am a little bit, I hate the word psychic, but, kind of was a little bit more open and wasn't ready for all the hitchhikers. And
Right.
and also the churches were right next to, and people were going into the churches that were right next to the graveyard, and these old churches had all these like sigils and all kinds of really cultish symbols. And I thought, wow, every time that they go into that church, they're activating all of this old cult stuff, and they're activating all of those beings in that graveyard and all that whole vortex that's open that things crawl in and out of.
Right.
And I had to go into there was a thrift store, and it was right next to this huge graveyard, like somewhere over there in Tennessee, Kentucky. It was a very green place, I remember, because I needed some rain gear because I didn't have like a raincoat or anything. And so I stopped, I went in, came out. My dog's looking at me. I can smell cigarettes super thick inside the van. And I didn't leave the windows open, because it was cooler out. And then I turn around in the van and I see this dead guy smoking, like chain smoker in the van. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. You need to get the F out. Because
Right.
we're not taking travelers, and we're not doing a lot of this stuff. And I actually came in contact with somebody who was like highly possessed in New York. And that was a pretty shady situation. Took me like about 3 weeks to shake that thing because it tried to jump me from the person, and it was pretty extreme. It was a pretty extreme event. But yeah, so the West Coast can be very difficult because of the cabal influence and the things that they're doing chemically and radioactively to us. But I'll tell you what, on the East Coast, like you got to really keep your guard up because there's so many old areas,
Uh-huh.
that you have to be really, really careful about where you're stepping and where you're going, and really
What you
paying
pick up.
attention
Right. Because even in
energetically.
items, yeah. Even items you can pick up the energies and people don't recognize that.
Yeah, no, I work with periodically. I work with John Zaffe, who is, he's been doing exorcisms for years and years and years, and he's the haunted collector. He was on TV, but he hated Hollywood. He said that they were super corrupt and they would edit things out of his shows, and so he didn't do a very long time. But he has a museum slash place where he puts a lot of haunted items so that they don't go back out into the public and people get a hold of them. And periodically, I have people who call me, and then I help them to sort out which objects they may have acquired that are causing the killing of their dogs, all kinds of hell breaking loose in their house, their marriages breaking up, violence, all of a sudden. And I help them to figure out how to to isolate the object. And then what happens is once the object is found, then I have them send it. I connect them to John. Once the object, they figure out what it is. And then because he doesn't have time to talk to them, so I try to help them. And then once that happens, then I have them send the object directly to John Zaffis so he can put it in quarantine.
Gosh.
So it stays out of the public. But yeah, no, there's crazy stuff. Like I had a
There
friend
was
of mine.
remember the TV series Friday the 13th?
Yeah.
So they were trying to warn us. Nobody just thinks it's real. But I've seen images on things that, oh my gosh, definitely not of this time, and definitely not of a happy-go-lucky kind of situation. So I don't pick up a lot of stray items.
I don't pick up crystals either. My Bobido taught me that wherever that crystal came from, it was stolen from the earth.
Right.
And it belonged where it belonged on the earth, and that to stay away from a lot of that kind of stuff. So I really, really, really work hard at not picking things up. And it's weird because the mindset, even if I see money, like $5 on the ground or whatever else, I just remind myself, I don't know who touched that, who left it, what it's programmed with, and I'm not going to touch it.
Oh, I would just say bless me and go on my way. And I haven't had any real hitchhikers in quite some time, so.
Yeah, I don't do them. I just wasn't prepared for the East Coast. But I do kind of have a story. So I have a friend of mine who was a son of a diplomat. He's been on my show. And then he studied, in India and Japan, and also went on to college and studied a lot of kind of more, I guess, about, different kinds of religions and, different kinds of stuff like that. But anyway, he's, I think, a little bit older than I am. Anyway, there was this Japanese in his life. There was this Japanese, like, India link with people, because of back then people were going to the Golden Temple, and there was just lots of, people studying and, blah, blah, blah. And this is a long, long time ago. When he came back to the U.S., he was doing the Sikh thing, the Kundalini kind of Sikh thing, also heavy, other types of yoga, yogiism from India. But when he came back to the U.S., he fit right in nicely with Yogi Bhajan, who had just kind of come to the U.S. and who built a compound, who was, brought Kundalini yoga to America. And anyway, so he studied with him for years in New Mexico, and then he kind of went on and lived his life and kept up studying. But during this time frame, he was given from this Japanese guy all of these ancient pictures, like painting kind of pictures of hardcore deities.
Yeah.
And they were very old, and so he was gifted those, and then he was carrying them around with him, up until 3 years ago when I went to visit him, and I saw that he was still hanging them in the RV, and I'm like, dude, you haven't gotten rid of these things yet? Like, they're dangerous. And so one of the deities, there's this depiction of a deity, and there's 3 people with swords standing around it, and they cut off its head, and the body of the deity standing there with 3 lines of blood gushing out, and the head's on the ground. And it's a whole, like, there's a whole practice around it. It's kind of like more of the darker mystical type, in every religion or, philosophy, there's always like the magic spelly part, and then there's always like, the other side, the general side that most people see. So we had this long discussion because, he was having these strokes. Went to see him for a month. He was living at a place where there was a pool, and I'd helped him with some of his strokes. When I was down in New Mexico in 2014, I went to visit him on that crazy, Vision Quest trip. And I stayed with him for quite a bit until we could get his arm moving, like his left arm working and functioning. And then later on, a couple years ago, I went down and saw him when he was in San Diego, and he was living at a place where they had a private swimming pool. So I was making him do a lot of different kinds of getting away more from the yoga, which was damaging his body more, because it was so hardcore. And then had him in the swimming pool, and then continued to rehabilitate him because he ended up having a couple more strokes, even though he had, like, an awesome diet, everything else, but it was all related to this neck injury he had. So here he has these paintings, and the one has this, deity's head cut off with 3 streams of blood coming out, 3 people with swords that he's had forever, early on, when he was in India doing a lot of this work. I think before Yogi Bhajan, around that time. Anyway, he ends up diving into some water and literally breaking his neck, like, so severely, that they put him in, like, he's lucky, that he walked. But, we were talking about how everything, even his strokes, were originating back to this time frame of when he got that painting.
Wow.
And I said, if you have this kind of deity, even if you're not doing work to it or not, there's a common theme, this neck thing, right? What's going on with the neck? It tried to break your neck,
Right.
and you now have strokes because you never had the stuff fixed in the neck, right? So it blocked off, even though he can walk and do all this stuff, it still blocked off a lot of channels to his brain being able to work with his body. So he's, later on he's having, like, strokes and stuff. So anyway, he said, well, can you douse a lot of this stuff and just see, like, how severely it is? And I said, yeah, no problem. So there was a lot of things. Just some of the stuff I collected because it was native stuff and it really needs to be returned back. I'm in the process still of returning these sacred items back. People buy these kinds of things and have no idea what they're getting involved in. And it's just, it's really kind of sad too. But this picture was, like, really bad. He had 3 of them. And we boxed them all up and sent them to John Zaffe's to be put into his, collection that he could, monitor, on the danger level, because, obviously they keep getting passed along. I mean, people could be in a car and get beheaded in an accident.
Right.
They could, break their neck. It's all going to happen to the neck because that's the deity. That's what the deity wants. It wants the break in that area for whatever, reason. So anyway, it was funny because when we got to that painting in his RV, because he had to live in his RV that he bought because of all the strokes and everything else. And he wanted to live at a hot springs area where he could constantly work on rehabilitating himself, because he's rehabilitating himself for the rest of his life,
Right.
because of what's happened. And so we get to it and it spins out. It just, the whole dowsing thing just spins out of control. And I just said, you know what, we just have to send this stuff on. So we literally take all the 3 paintings. Next day, we box them up. We send them to John Zaffe's. And then he lets us know that he received them. But yeah, so periodically I do that. I help people get rid of those kinds of objects. And it's so great that we have John Zaffe's, that will take them. If you have a haunted object out there, I think he's in Pennsylvania, John Zaffe's, and you believe that you have some kind of haunted object that you don't really know what to do with, box that sucker up and send it to him.
There's a museum of just that kind of stuff in the Masonic building. I forget the name of, here in Nashville. I forget the name of the guy who runs it. I've tried to have him on my show, but he wouldn't come on my show, even though he was a part of Revolution Radio for a while. But I don't think I'd dare go into his building.
Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. I mean, you see things like happen where people go on a haunted walk, or they go to, like, some kind of haunted site,
Right.
just to go for a walk to look. And the next thing you know, all hell's breaking loose at their house. I mean, the thing is that...
Well, people don't even recognize, Bridgette, you could walk into a bar. It doesn't matter
Exactly.
where you are. If
Exactly.
there is an entity out there and you're playing the same thing that it misses and yearns for so much, it can attach itself. So
Yeah.
is Lenny still with us?
Yeah, he's still there. I see
Yeah.
his
All
picture.
right. Well, you and Lenny talk for a minute while I go out for my break. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you go out for your break.
All right. Go.
All right.
Well, I worked at a zoo for a while, and the amount of artifacts that the zoo had in its collection and the amount that it was allowed to display had me totally confused for a while until I recognized that whenever they picked up contraband in the area that was against fish and wildlife rules for people having, the zoo would somehow end up with the contraband. And they weren't allowed to display it, they were only allowed to store it. But it was one of the weirdest things that just didn't strike me. But now that we're having this discussion about energies, knowing that a lot of this ivory and other stuff was taken in a way that wasn't like real good, I could see where there's lots of energies and where it might not have been a bad thing to have all this stuff locked away from the realm of people where it could be out and affecting people's psyches.
Well, yeah, and I was helping wherever the resources come from native. I mean, obviously there's, like say Tusk, there's a lot of murder, violent murder that happens. Sometimes they'll just tell people flat out, they'll just hack, they'll injure the animal, the elephant, get it on the ground, and then they'll just hack its face up while it's alive to steal this stuff because, it's worth money. I mean, more and more there's like ivory trade is being, ceased worldwide. But you also think about like when I was working to help um, bring farming to a native reservation here in Nevada. And so I was trying to work with the people of the reservation. I ended up getting kicked off by the BIA because the Indian, police, FBI, that it's run by white people because they were trying to sell off the water from the natives and they didn't want people to know this, so they didn't want them to start farming because obviously then the natives will find out that there's no water, no irrigation water anymore because now there's no water for the crops. It was like this whole continuation of the USA corporation copy pasted over everything. But
Yeah. I seem
one
to
thing,
remember a Val Kilmer movie that had that as a reason where he went back to Indian lands because they were stealing things in water, and he was a rookie federal agent and he got a real learning from the movie.
yeah,
And
so one of the things that happened was that because there's no farming and the elders are not being given resources that they need. They really, really want these resources. So one of the biggest discussions was like the elders wanted to know, like if what kind of herd animals could we use for the farming to rehabilitate soil, blah, 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 blah. Because they wanted to know if they could get the skins, like how all this would be distributed because they couldn't make their drums, they couldn't make their clothing. I mean, everything that they make is a sacred, right? Every little piece of everything that they use, they bless and heal those animals, the land that they use these resources and products from. They use everything. They have, drums and rattles and clothing and really important, work that they do. That's work. When they make this stuff, it has so many prayers on it. It goes out into the population and it heals every time it's worn or touched. And so one of the big things was that, if you're stealing and hiding ivory from, say, the indigenous people of that area, that they would have taken something like that, or even the bone or whatever else, and they would have made indigenous products. They would have made medicine things for their life, whether they wore it or they had it for art or ceremony. And so, also that taking those resources and hiding it also harms the indigenous people worldwide from putting their medicine out into the world and making their medicines. Um, and so I think a lot about that too. It keeps them from putting in their activations and changing the, geometrical structure of the water and the air and everything that they do with their technologies. One thing people don't understand is, like, a lot of people will talk about, wearing native clothing that has a lot of those, individual pieces of leather that flop back and forth, and they serve multi-purposes. They serve the purpose of keeping snow off and rain. It helps to keep everything dry if you're out and you're hunting and doing things. It also, helps to activate energies. So each little leather band, as it flops and moves, has a prayer on it. And so can you imagine all of those prayers flopping together, on the shirt that you're wearing? And so by not allowing indigenous people to have resources, these kinds of resources to make their medicines, um, you know, because not only is the shirt good for you, it helps you with hunting, keeps you warm, but it also is constant prayers around you and the world that you walk through. I mean, that, the thing is, like, people just don't realize, like,
It's not only the three-dimensional world that exists.
exactly. It is a multi-dimensional framework, and most traditional indigenous people and the elders know exactly how all of this works. And to keep them from having skins and hides and all of these things that they could work with to make these medicines, and to teach their people how to make these medicines, to make sure that everything is activated and prayed over. And I think
Well,
that's
that's why the indigenous colonies, I'll just say because I can't think of another word, the Amazon and all that is important. I mean, people
yeah.
don't recognize that we need the simple, basic, because they are the grounders.
Yeah, the number one knowledge of the Amazon people is the plant-based medicines, because they all have great knowledge. The elders that still have clinics, and there was this killer at my summer herbalism school,
Now, wait a
because my
minute. Is killer good or killer bad? Because I
oh,
see
sorry.
killer. Oh,
Okay,
yeah. And then she even said, sorry, Lenny.
I know. Okay, so
Where is
anyway,
he?
at the
Let me ask him where he is. Are you here, Lenny? Where'd he go?
I don't know.
Yes,
Is
I'm
it?
at the back, which I was muted because I didn't want the noise from back being outside to affect things.
What
And
were they
then,
doing?
no, not much. Just put up.
You're fading in and out. You might be better to come in. Okay, so go ahead, Bridget.
Um, um,
We
so
were
I feel
talking.
like
Okay, take a
excuse
breath.
me.
Take a breath. Everybody
I just still
breathe.
have I still have that cold. All right. So I forget what the name of the it was like 20 minutes long, and it was a video, because my teacher would show us on Sunday evenings after, all day of school. We would sit and eat popcorn that she would powder different herbs and infuse the popcorn with the herbs, powdered herbs. It was killer. Um,
Ah,
and then we'd have movie night, so this movie, and so it was about this woman who was white, who would end up in the Amazon, who was like a nurse too, I think, in mainstream in America, and went down there to seek this Amazonian man's healing work. And he taught her all of what he knows how to do, and a lot of the plants that were in the Amazon. And so it was, a lot of it was centered around these plants that can cure like almost everything, and then how she used them. And the man was, and so at some point after he trained her, he gave her his practice, and he was like 90, and he said, I'll teach you all this stuff if you keep my practice going, because there aren't a lot of people that I can teach this. And since you want to do this, then you just keep my clinic going for the people that will come to see you until you can't anymore. And so she was even treating him still at 102, and he was blind, and he would go in to get his treatments from her that he trained her to do. But it was about, like, the cool thing is that it was surrounded by this Amazonian medicine man. And he actually physically worked on people, and he prepared herbal stuff. He did energy healing work and all this other stuff. I was so glad to see that movie because, you know, it really ties in just for my work, everything that I do and how unusual it is, you know, in the United States. And
Well, because they outlawed it. You can't have truth in this here USA. You can't
yeah,
even find the good old books anymore or anything else like that. I mean,
well, that's why when you come across a good old book, you pay for it. You like pick that bad boy up, put it in your collection.
that's
Oh, did you
right.
guys I'll change the subject. But
That's
anyway, yeah,
okay.
the medicine is the big time stuff we got to save right now, the earth medicine, because it's going fast. And there's no, you know, if we're not saving the seeds, we can't replicate it and we can't, you know, remake it.
Because we're only going to have GMOs and they won't provide seeds next generation.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, in the multidimensional facet of native seeds, you know, even their seeds are older than heirloom. And their seeds have these multidimensional qualities to them as well.
Yeah,
Like
you're
we were
talking the corn guy.
Yeah, and all the seeds. I mean, I grew this stuff from it's originally from Africa. There's lots of species of it. And then India started cultivating it a long time ago, but it's in the grasses, you know, it's under grasses, but sorghum. And in Asia, you know, they make a lot of the really expensive soy sauces from sorghum, and a lot of these indigenous type people, you know, have are using sorghum for lots of different things. It's a pretty interesting plant, but it's really a cool plant. And I grew it not this last summer, but the summer before. And along with my native corn and my Hopi native sunflowers and whatever. And then I also had some native Tulsi, and all these were seeds that were actually native, you know, that were in somebody else's care that had a native seed bank. But
Right.
it was just yeah, I mean, it had like this total quality of teaching me, you know, how to protect my medicines and how to develop it, because it sort of looks like the one that I grew is called popping sorghum. And so you can actually take the kernels and you can throw them into a pan. They're a lot smaller than a corn. And then you can pop them, you know, like a
Eat roasted.
yeah, pop them and eat them popped, but you can make all kinds of, you can ferment them. They use them, you know, as grains, you know, in other places. And people don't realize like corn originally was from grasses. You know, some of the oldest corn was grass that had like a small seed on it.
Well, it's almost like everything could almost be considered it.
Well, I think so many things were grasses, you know, and
Right.
things developed from the grasses. I mean, that's kind of like what I've learned, but it had a multi-dimensional quality to it, the sorghum.
Neat. Okay, I have a question from
Hmm.
chat.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And it's from my friend Dirt. Isn't that a great name? His name is Dirt. Well, at least that's what he comes in. And in fact, I met him in Florida. Free PDF book when technology fails. Mona, please ask Doc Time and Bridgette about the solutions that Matt Stein gave as he, or you both knew Matt, didn't you? When tech fails. Thanks, Mona. Good
Yeah,
day.
Matt lived close to here. He lived up in Truckee, which
Well,
is
you
like
had him on the
quite a
show
bit.
with Richard when you first
Yeah,
started.
I've interviewed him over my career quite a bit, and I've gone to stay at his house when he was alive. And yeah, um, very interesting stuff around Matt Stein. And um, yeah, I'm just but I think that what, you know, he gave us, you know, I remember talking to him about when technology fails, and I forget what the incident was that kind of confronted him. And he was an MIT graduate, and he also, I think he also was kind of a testifier for some certain kinds of things. So courts and attorneys would use him to help with research and certain kinds of testifying.
Background was in engineering.
Yeah. So, but there was a point where he just kind of something, I forget what the event was that kind of made him snap, but he ended up traveling, I think all over the world actually, and talking to the experts in all of the fields that are in his books. So when technology fails, he actually went and talked to people in these technologies, and doing, even primitive life skills work. And he compiled over 7 years all the information. He wanted to make it like, the best that he possibly could. And Matt was the overachiever for sure.
Oh, I've been called that too. That's
But
kind of
that's,
funny.
yeah. And so that's why it's so, um, I think, kind of thorough. When you think that, Lenny, it's pretty thorough on lots of different bases.
I like the first aid chapter where it just dealt with what you're doing for immediate dealing with things and getting right into it. But the problem is that we know that technologies are going to fail. We don't know the order that they're going to fail in. And so if the electricity goes off, it's a whole different set of problems than if all the water's polluted and we can't use it. Or, I mean, we're at the point where the industrial mechanisms of putting combustion in the air and getting things, I don't know.
But
It's
just
at the point.
imagine, Len, that, even though everybody be going through withdrawals, you remember 9/11, how clear the skies got because the planes weren't flying? I mean, it can really reverse, at least to a degree. But
We actually
people,
need to shut things down and start back up from human scale rather than the scale we're on now, which is massive and
industrial.
controlled.
Well, I'm kind of on the other end.
Oh, well, you would be. No, I'm teasing.
Yeah, I know. I'm on the extreme end just because the people that I
Yeah.
talk to and that I deal with.
Oh, and where you're at? Oh my gosh.
And, but everything is dying on the West Coast.
Oh, it's
It doesn't
dying
matter
here
if
too,
it
Bridget.
doesn't matter if it's the forest, and it's like it's super difficult to explain to people. But the basis of Rudolf Steiner's work, and also being involved with this movement as well, which is not a fear-based movement, but we do deal with environment, we deal with soil. That's what the 8 agricultural lectures of Rudolf Steiner were about, was that things were falling apart when he wrote the lectures about the seeds and the soil. In a lot of countries, Germany and Austria, they could already see the demise. And he was murdered in 1922. So, they already had the demise. They already saw the demise of the soil back then. I
Well,
mean,
the
now,
situation though is, Bridget, like one of the shows you had, which really was a great show about the farming, when the man said the earth likes the wooden plow, not all this
yeah,
metal
yeah.
and
Victor,
steel and
that's
everything else like that.
that's Schallenberger. That's Victor Schallenberger's work. He was the guy who did the research on that, and that was one of the things that I got to study when I was at Steiner College, right?
But that's one of the things that they have done. They demonetized
Mhm.
all the living organisms. No
Yeah.
wonder they're dying now. And
Well,
nobody wanted to listen to us when we spoke up real
but
loud decades ago.
they're not dying now. They're dead.
Well, I gotta say yay, and I gotta say
But
I'm
this is what I
still
deal with.
trying.
This is what I deal with, the soil. And so when I go out and look at the soil, even in large places where things sort of still look okay, and they
Right.
don't really understand what I'm trying to tell them, is the reason why all of a sudden everything's dying on their land is because the soil is sterile. It has no microbes in it, and it will not sustain life. So it kills the tree from the roots. And I think in Georgia, they did a whole bunch of, Dane Wigington was involved in this. They did a whole bunch of water testing. This was like years ago. This was like probably 6 or 7 years ago. And they did a whole bunch of testing, like in the Georgia area, because this woman had this large piece of land and these old trees on it and everything else. It was beautiful. And her trees started to lean and then they would fall over and they'd still have green on them. They wouldn't look dead. And so
Right.
they couldn't figure out what was going on. So Dane Wigington and them all got involved. They did tons of water testing. What they found was the chemtrails had sterilized the soil to 10 feet deep.
Oh fuck. Well,
And so the trees were dying because the roots died. They were like, sterilized. They
Aww.
didn't have relationships. There's nothing for them to grow in. There's no nutrient. And then, they suffocate and they fall over. Because people forget, you know, the respiratory system of a tree is below the ground. I mean, they can, they do probably have pores and, they probably breathe in a little bit, but their big respiratory system's underground. So when you kill that and they can't, breathe anymore, because it's sterilized, so there's no microbes breaking down the different kinds of combinations of minerals and gases and all these different things. And that while they're breaking it down in the soil, and then it gets utilized by all the soil system. And so when that's no longer happening because you don't have the microbes to actually break down
Right.
the
The
stuff anymore,
right, the
and
decomposition.
then the trees die. And so this is the saddest part, is that trees are big and can withstand a lot. So the environment is beyond help unless somebody like me that can produce medicines for it in 3 months and start spraying it. But what's not going to affect the other land around it, when you see the trees go down, it's the end, because they're the ones that have stood against it for as long as possible. And so all the other plants, most of them will be completely done in, and even the seeds could be pretty bad.
Right, because I see a lot of plants producing seeds, trying to think, even though they're dying trees, that by producing their pine cones that they'll go to the next step. And I have been seeing these trees dying for over 10 years, so it's very sad.
Out in
Well, and
Oregon
so
where
that's
I
the
was,
thing. Yeah, go ahead, Lenny.
out in Oregon where I was, the trees were dying from the top down also because the system for pulling the water up through the roots and through the phylum in the tree wasn't working properly. So
Well,
there's definitely a lot of inorganic chemistry with the aluminum, barium, and strontium being sprayed.
yeah,
That
and also on the top, they get the chemtrails settle up there, and it's closer to the sun, and it actually burns them.
Right.
Because
I
we
see
use
evidence.
in biodynamics we use a preparation called 501, and basically we take quartz crystals, and we like the clearer ones, um, just because they have forces in them. They're the forces that we use for the 501, and we crush them by hand. So we make our medicine, we make it all by hand. And then what you do is it's into a powder form, and then you take flow form water or structured water that you've stirred, and then you put the silica crystal powder base into a cow horn. And then you put the purified water on it just enough, and then you put it into the ground for about a year, and you use the astrological calendars to map when it's time to bring it out. But what you would do is then you would take that and you would put it into water, like I would do 5-gallon water bucket, and you stir it back and forth. So you stir one way, then you come back through, you create chaos, and you stir the other way until everything's binded. Usually takes about an hour. And then what you do is you filter it off in like a stocking, pantyhose, and you take out the bulk, and then you have what is infused into the water. So anything you put in there infuses itself to the water, kind of like similar to homeopathic works, right?
Right.
And so then what happens is you spray it on things. So we would spray that. How I understand chemtrails, being on things and burning them is because we use silica, and silica actually increases photosynthesis. So you have the one leaf, it has, it's
Oh, even
basically,
though horsetail is pure silica and it doesn't grow any leaves at all, it's reeds.
yeah, it has a different process of silica than the crystal. But we use the crystal. So when we have grains, we will spray all the seed grains before they're harvested and then spray them after, because the silica, the quartz crystal, the 501, will actually keep them from ever getting mold or fungus on them. So they store really well. And plus this, mineral helps them as the seeds as well to be stronger, when they go back into the ground. And also I've used 501 for things like, say, this year would have been perfect if I had been growing tomatoes or something like that were taking a long time to ripen and the season was short. Right before the cold snaps, I could actually spray them with the 501, and it would put like thousands of mirrors on each leaf, and they would take in as much more sunlight, and so that they would ripen faster, and so that I could harvest them before they froze.
Well, my tomatoes didn't do squat this year. We're losing a lot in this area. Even though we are on a crystal smoky quartz and pink and amethyst and regular quartz, we are on a really crystalled area, but I got to get pictures of those trees that are dying.
Yeah.
They're like the yew tree, and they've got elongated cones, but I've been seeing them dying because their tap roots are screwed.
Yeah.
And okay, the guy up the road tried to grow his corn. The corn grew, but it didn't grow any corn that I saw, and he took it down so much faster, and usually the wild geese are in there getting the insects and that. None of that happened this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is like, because we don't, do the multi-dimensional and physical medicines like the indigenous people, we are also energetically, forcing all of these other beings to leave the planet and not reproduce anymore. I mean, and it started with the Aborigines. I mean, if anybody's read the book, The Mutant Message Down Under, and they tell the woman that they say, like, we're not going to procreate anymore as an indigenous tribe. And so we're actively not going to keep our tribe going because we're the oldest people on earth, and we're done trying to talk to all the other people and try to teach them anything. So we're leaving. And so that's how a lot of,
That's really sad, though, because it wasn't the intention of this ignorance to occur. You know what I mean? It's all been through the programming of we're going to be at the top of the hour break, even though there's not going to be any break music. Oh, okay. But anyway, that, yeah, we've just imagine what's happening within us because of all this damage. I mean, it's just sad because this is our 5th try, and I don't blame them for giving up, but I'm not giving up. You know what I mean? I'm just not going to give up. And I just trying. So I'm going to give you and Lenny some time again. All right. I shall return. Can't break those old habits, because I really just don't care that they're there because I'm so used to it. Be right back.
All right, Lenny, what do you have to say?
I'm saying that I'm sitting here in the front lawn at Mona's on a lawn chair, soaking up the sun on a beautiful day. There are no clouds in the sky. And in the previous few days, the clouds in the sky weren't real clouds. They were the chemtrail clouds. And you can just tell by the differences in how things feel that something has changed a little bit in the alteration of the day. It's going to turn out okay no matter what happens. But whatever happens is what happens, and can't really dwell on the mechanisms. It's just that everything is so tenuous anymore that it seems like push it a little the wrong way and it breaks rather than works. And so if everybody's on the margins working their angle and it all breaks, it could be a heck of a time for a short while. But I think that human nature, from what I've seen, is one where once you get the egos out of the way, people stick up for each other. And that if people would just figure out that what we've been taught and take as true needs to be reinvestigated again and see if it still holds up, sometimes what people believe is a myth of their own creation. And I've met a lot of people on this trip who feel that they are just as talented as anyone else, but they've gotten a whole bunch of bad breaks. And those bad breaks are mostly because they've created them for themselves because they don't feel that they're as good as the people who, as good as the talk they talk. And so instead of improving themselves, they'd rather cut other people down. And I don't know, individuals are very helpful. Groups of people are rather closed.
So I have a question for you. So, you've been kind of on the road for what, 2 months now? I
Seems
don't know
like
how long.
4 months. I
Yeah.
left Oregon around July 4th.
Oh, yeah. So you're working on 3 months now, huh? Maybe. Yeah.
July, August, September, October. Yeah, I'm 3.5 months into it.
Yeah. Okay. So out of all the places you've been, are the chemtrails worse than what we have here on the West Coast? Or do we seem to have the worst ones? Like as far as visually that you could see in the sky of the different places that you went?
I haven't seen the total crisscrosses of absolute total domination in the sky, but when I was in New Mexico, I just figured that there's not really much reason to spray your chemtrails in New Mexico. There's not a lot of effectiveness from it. Oh, I have a dog approaching. I should reach down and scratch it. It seems like a nice dog. I haven't met him yet, but he's a dog that saw in a box one day. But he's out on the lawn now. But the animals and the dogs and cats and different things are sharper than people give them credit for. And if something's going on, the animal will tell you as a communicator what's going on with them and in their situation. So I have learned to trust people's animals more than I trust their what they're saying. But I think we're in good shape if we can communicate with our animals and just figure out nature again. It's one of those things where people are so isolated. The common thing that I've seen in all the households as I've toured the country right now is the dominance of a large screen television and the empty, no bookshelves, no books. There's a lot of videos. Some people have DVDs, but nobody's keeping books or reading books anymore.
Well, the books
I
are
am.
actually in the hallway.
I'm
But
kind of a
they're
book
only.
slut.
Oh, oh, don't go there with me. Anyway, there are some books, but it's usually entertainment books. We get, uh, what do you call them? Magazines of, oh gosh, Mona, why are you not thinking? Of household things like Better Homes and Gardens and crap like that. And they
Oh,
tell you nothing. Oh, you got to hear this. This just freaked the shish out of me, man. I was looking through one of the books and it said, here's a recipe how to swirl chocolate, different colored chocolates, on apples. So I was interested in looking at the recipe. The only way I could have looked at the recipe was to use my phone. And I'm like going, what? This is how tight they are into using the technology to supposedly give you knowledge. I don't use my phone for flipping the Wi-Fi. I got two computers here. But I can't scan it on my computer. At least I don't have a computer. You know what I mean? This is how technologically they have gotten. And it behooves me that people just don't have a clue what nature is. I mean, you see what it is out there, Lenny. Yeah, the grass is green, but are there growing any dandelions? You see any clover?
I'm sitting here outside right now over near the burn pile in the lawn chairs,
Oh,
and looking,
that's where you were. I couldn't figure out where the hell you were.
and so there's good little diversity in this corner. It's
That's
turned.
pretty good Wi-Fi, honey. That's 500 feet.
In case listeners are confused, Lenny is staying with Mona right now. In case nobody got the heads up on that.
Yeah, we is visiting. Yes, very happily. It's been a great visit.
So what do you think of the Asheville area there, Mr. Lenny? What you've seen of it?
The initial feel that I've had for it is it's very much like Ashland, Oregon. And that's both a blessing and a curse because Ashland, Oregon turned out to be full of a lot of spiritual egos
Oh yeah.
where people talked a good game, but when it came down to the practice, they didn't play the game as well as they talked. And
Well, Asheville's a little bit different than that because it's usually the children and they don't know any better. And what we might see as a spiritual thing because of our energy and generation might be completely different for theirs. You know what I mean? Did that
yeah,
make sense?
when I was in Oregon up until very recently, I was mostly hanging out with either people who are older than I am or no people at all. So getting to experience younger generations than my current 60 years old was a very, very good reality awakener on the trip. And I've found myself in several situations out there where I was glad to be able to watch and not participate and just be an outsider seeing how insiders work and seeing how people treated each other and help use it to develop my theories on groups. But it really seems to me that as you build a trust between group members, the group becomes more effective. And then once you get more than 5 people together in a group, more people actually take away from how good the group can be in effectiveness. So we need to rethink our working environments to make small groups of people cooperative so that all the different tasks that need to get done can get done if we want to change how things get done from the way it is now where money just drives
Yeah,
everyone.
but the whole big and yeah, it does drive everybody because like Bridgette is going after healing in the native way. A lot of other people would go into the healing, the 3D pharmaceutical way. And Bridgette's doing it out of soul. They're doing it out of for the money. And so everybody also has different talents in that. I mean, it's not like Russia and China where they say 1, 2, 3, 4, you're a gymnast. 1, 2, 3, 4, you're a gymnast. You know what I mean? And just it's amazing to see because I think a lot of the schools are just not happening anymore. Not in our benefit. I mean, Bridgette's getting more education out of what she's doing with her weekend or however many days that she's doing because it's from somebody who's using soul, not the money issue. But
Right.
Oh, and
It's
I'm
a
really
illusion
I'm
where she
kind of
gets to go out and do it. Go
oh,
ahead.
maybe go ahead.
hey, so I'm kind of excited. I haven't got to
Ooh,
talk to Lenny for a while. So
that's okay.
anyway, so some stuff went down with my second herbal certification, which was the 3-monther once a week for 3 months. And so I'm
Right.
not doing the second and the third one. So you guys don't have to cover for my show. You could be on my show if you want, um, but anyway, so what happened was that door kind of closed kind of abruptly and kind of in a crazy way. So I decided I was going to spend the same money that I would spend in October for that class, that I would spend it on, you know, whatever door open kind of a thing. So I waited for like a week to see what was going to happen because I'm trying to figure out where I'm supposed to go. I mean, there's this
Well,
very
can
weird
I say
stuff.
something?
Yeah.
Okay. This area is the hippie area. If you actually go and internet search for the areas, farms, and communities, and that you'll find a whole bunch. Outside of this area, you're not going to find it as much, except for
Well,
maybe
but see that, yeah, right
Karen.
now there's like a weird cross between Grass Valley and me possibly going up there, but I'd be going up there for different reasons, for farming and soil and doing consulting, and teaching people how to make medicines to save their lands, and that they can actually spray on their land to save
It's
it.
really vital. So if you want to get Bridgette's information, she has a banner on the homepage, revolution.radio.
Yeah,
So you can
Healthcare by Bridgette.
contact her.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So
anyway,
people hear it.
but then there's this real weird pull for the herbal side of Asheville, because I know people that are in Asheville. I have clients that are in Asheville that I see once a month, on, for
Yeah, well, I'm very
shamanism.
thankful for that for our cohort.
Yeah. So there's these two like definite pulls between those two areas. It's kind of a weird thing that's happening. But what happened is that right now, I got sent an email from the National Biodynamic Association, and they're doing a thorough study of Steiner's 8 agricultural lessons, which I'm really excited about, by somebody who's thoroughly studied them.
Neat.
And this is like Victor Schallenbergy stuff, but it's in, the Rudolf Steiner arena. So, real authentic traditional like study. So I'm taking that course. I've been signed up for it. And it's weird how things are leading me back to the soil. So the herbalist stuff is stopped. Then the stuff started opening up is back to the soil, the multidimensional functions of the reality, because that's what Steiner taught. He taught those functions right along with the food you're growing, the soil that you're making, like it's all has multiple usages. So then what is even crazier about it is because there's no coincidences.
Right.
Then what happened is that I got the class paid for because it's an online webinar through BDA, and I couldn't get through, so I had to start emailing them because I couldn't get into the website. Their website like blocked me. And so I needed to get in there to get to the webinar when the webinar happened. So I started sending them emails saying, like I'm paid, but I can't get onto the website. I need like a password reset or something. And then they contacted me back. And then I ended up calling them on the phone and talking to the main person. And she's like, it's like the first time ever they're going to do webinar certification for the Demeter certification. And because of my background with large landscaping and restoration and native seeds, and I was telling her, my biodynamic certifications and all this other stuff, herbal medicine, because mostly I took herbal medicine to see how plants work, because I want to use them to put into other, environments to help heal
All right.
environments.
I'm going to add something to that.
What?
Well, because herbs each have a signature, and they are a life source upon their own, to the point where they, like, if you're allergic to poison ivy, the cure is right next to it. The true
exactly.
nature's way is, if you are prone, we can help you unprone, or whatever. It's always got that fix. And people just don't realize that at all.
So mostly, even though I've learned how to make all these herbal medicines, I have people buying them.
Nice.
But I also know I'm learning how that plant fits into the environments, and what happens when it's not in that environment, and what happens when it goes back into that environment. So I'm also using it. But anyway, she said, have you thought about teaching, like some webinars? We put it out in the email, and
oh, cool.
And so maybe if you put some stuff together and then email us, and we can figure out if that's going to work or not. And she said, if people really like your stuff, you could teach a longer program, a longer course, like 6 to 8 weeks. I was super excited about that. I'm just super excited.
Why not? That is so cool.
I know.
I want you to come do the crystal thing around here.
So, and so
we got crystals here, I'm telling you.
So I was super excited about that.
And that's so cool.
Yeah, and then it's led to, on top of that they said that I could take the, that I would be a great fit for the program for the Demeter certification. So the Demeter certification is the highest grade possible of a certification for food and land. Demeter is International Biodynamic Certification. And so to be able to go through the program here, probably starting in January, and get certified, I can go and certify people's lands and look at their lands, and even while I'm there, help them. Like, oh, you should plant some of this, or you should plant some of that, or maybe I'll learn something from seeing their land. But I would just be like perfect to be able to drive around and go to people's places, and and I get paid for it. I get paid to travel to go to see the land, and for the certification. So I it'd just be like perfect for me, because I'm still, when you're working on, I think you have to, whatever subject that you approach, and I mean, Lenny probably understands this too, is that you have to start collectively creating a database for whatever that is, right? Of different kinds of information. And the best thing that I can do for soil and building a database is to look at different environments, and whether they're mountainous or whether they're totally desert, whether they're this or that, to accumulate a database of, varieties of soil and land, kind of.
Well, because each one's going to need different elements to amend it.
Yeah, and different processes, and sometimes I think too that then what happens is you have this database, and you could be at this place, kind of terrain you've never seen before, and then the terrain might remind you of 4 other places, and you can be like, oh, well, I saw this growing there, this works really well there, we could create these types of water fixtures, to help support it naturally. The thing that blows me, I'm on this kind of crazy like process of soil, and getting medicines made on that soil that you can utilize and spray, and it shocks me that no one cares about that. It's so crazy right now. Like, everyone should be learning this and spraying it on all the dirt that they're on, no matter where they're at. And the other thing that blows my mind is how few people understand where water comes from. Water comes from it pooling onto the ground, and then the roots carrying it deep back into the aquifer while they filter and clean it, and then it comes back up. And nothing in our whole reality, especially in the United States, operates that way. So that's why the aquifers are not being refueled, is because all the water, the fresh water that comes down, is being, redirected through drains and everything else. I mean, basically out to the ocean. Eventually,
I agree.
the ocean.
What the frack?
What the frack?
Well, and one of the other funny things about that is I know I was taught that the only way we get water is from above. Okay? That it doesn't work the way that they say. It's just all within the rain, etc., etc. But exactly like you said, the runoff doesn't help, and other things of those natures. I
think the earth produces primary water. Just
pardon?
like I think the earth produces primary water, just like it produces primary oil deep inside the planet. But that at this point, we found so many of the sources in our pursuit of oil that the water table is as diminished as the oil table, and we need a rest to let it build back up again.
You tell Nestle to rest.
Well, this is the thing. I have people that I work with that are doing large-scale land restoration, and a lot of them are working in Texas right now, and they're doing they're helping to show developers how to redevelop pieces of land, so they'll build fewer houses but more of these natural water retainment areas. And so some of these towns and places have gone from 0 water in any of the aquifers to, even through drought, to refilling back up because these areas are capturing the water and actually filling the water. But there's some key components. How the land is developed, you have to have swells, which are, pools where water can collect, and then you have to have a diverse amount of plant life to support that whole area. And the more roots you have, the more root systems, the more funnels you have for the water to go down. Less plant systems or topsoil that's removed, then the earth doesn't have the ability to absorb the water, because it becomes hard. And so what it does is it starts to run off and create mudslides and flooding. If there were more places that had, these natural landscapes and these swells and these areas to handle the water, there would be so much far less flooding, in city areas. But I've thought about this a lot. Say you would have one apartment building, right? But then on the other four corners, you would literally have to have these natural settings, that you have these areas where the water can pool. You could develop them nicely for people to walk around and
Well,
be
now you know why
in natural
castles had
landscape.
moats.
Exactly. Well, and did you hear the Tartarian guys when they talked
Yeah,
about
that
how,
was a good show. We did listen to you.
yeah, I'm going to have them on 4 days in a row over 2 weeks in November, because they've come up with their own topics, so I'm really excited about it.
Cool.
But he was
And
saying
that's
that,
Wednesday, Studio A.
yeah,
At what
and
time?
Saturday. It, the my Wednesday is noon Eastern Standard Time, and then my Saturday, carrying stones and digging holes, is 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So in November, like mid-November, they're going to come on for 4 times in a row, and they have like
Cool.
their own what they want to talk about. So I'm super excited. They've organized themselves, and so they're just super awesome. But
If you
anyway,
can get your website, have a portion there where you can put Mike's pictures of the star forts and do that in
Oh, that's a good
advance,
idea, right?
get everybody to a place where he could talk better about his information.
yeah, that's what he said. We're working on it. And he also didn't, it didn't sound like he wanted to be on by himself. He wanted to be in a group. So they're doing it more as a group. So that's kind of collectively what they've decided, is they're going to continue to come on as a group, not individually. And so we're
Cool.
working out all the details to try to make sure, everybody can bring their information. But he was talking, so Mike's, he's got like 2,000 old maps that he's libraried. And they were talking about that on the show. But one of the things he said, there's a lot of towns that had circles all the way around them, that could have held water. Would have helped. Having a big circle like a moat around the whole town could help with so many different things. Could help you to save water for emergency. Could help with runoff of the city, a place
Well,
for
it
the
just
water to
makes
go.
too much sense,
It could
Bridget.
create like a whole different energy thing, you know what I mean? Because it's the circle, the hoop. So yeah,
Yeah, exactly. No corners. That's so cool.
yeah. So anyway, it just yeah, I just think a lot about, and
Yeah,
I'm
I
really
think a
looking
lot
forward
too
to see
sometimes, Bridget.
these maps, because these circles and things like that might give me more ideas for landscape and land restoration kind of stuff.
Well, it is necessary, and people don't recognize. Excuse me. When I read the book from Sun Bear, Bright Dawn, Bright Day, or Dark. Anyway, it was a great book because what we've done with by paving the land, we have besides destroyed the oxygen system, it's also heating up the rest of the planet. And people
Yeah,
don't realize that
yeah.
blacktop is so much of a heat conductor. And it's not that we're creating it, it's just that we're living their creations that have created it.
Well, in concrete, they come
Concrete's
right out and
white
tell
at
you that,
least.
well, but concrete steals oxygen out of its environment.
Well, and it's also porous.
That's one of the main things that it does. But it also is a reflector. I mean, the only thing that doesn't reflect is brown microbial rich soil.
I'm black.
Brown, yeah, like some really nice moist,
Yeah, but you're thinking soil.
beautiful.
I'm thinking blacktop.
Well, no, but that, I mean, the opposite is the soil versus the blacktop. And
Oh yeah,
so,
I want the soil. I
yeah,
don't
any,
want blacktop.
yeah, and they remove the topsoil. And another native teacher of mine taught me that you can't puncture the earth. So a lot of people have houses in it that are causing vibrations in the earth, kind of like each point that goes into the earth of that house is like some kind of crazy acupuncture needle. And
Right.
then it takes in the vibration of what's going on in each house. And then it's like acupuncture needles vibrating. And it actually totally uh, complicates and confuses ley lines and causes major, frequency disruptions in the earth. And so he said that
But that's what the Gwen
you should,
towers are doing, Bridget. They're
yeah,
vibrating it apart, and they're probably mostly on ley lines. How sad
right.
is
But everybody's individual house is that way
right?
that
It
you
just
live in.
contributes to the bigger liquefaction of the layer of soil of the earth. No wonder it can't grow.
Well, and no wonder, we can't seem to move forward, you know? Yeah, I mean, it's like
I do believe, though, that your restoration will make a difference.
well, it makes a difference. This is the fun thing is it makes a difference for me. And the thing
Yeah,
that
the
I'm,
heck with everybody else.
yeah, the thing that I'm most missing right now is land. I really, but I don't want to go work on other people's land where I might not be for a long term. I want to start building something that's 50 years, that it has step-by-step process for 50 years.
Well, do we have 50 years, really?
No, one of the things that I've heard from biodynamic farmer is that Steiner's work, biodynamics is geared towards 50 years. How do we make this a, self-sustainable, evolving, organism, like the stomach, and then it has the membrane lining around it, or a brain with the membrane lining around it. And so all the concepts are about, how do we make this multifunctioning organism that works perfectly together, all the components of it.
Well, the
We
way
have
it was
one already.
intended. Go
We have
ahead.
Huh?
it's called Revolution Radio, isn't it? Revolution Radio is an organism where all the DJs work together and everybody contributes and nobody gets paid, but it all manages to work out so that we can have the most vibrant radio station on air all the time.
Well, it's
Yeah.
been 8 years, and we do need donations, people. So I don't like to beg, but come on, if I can send my $20 in, so can you folks.
And I advertise. I
Yeah,
pay for
you
the
pay for
archives
you.
and I
Yeah.
pay monthly advertising. That's the other thing people don't get is that, we do have, and it's super easy if you have like a business. Um, it's super easy. You can go to freebanners.com and you can make a banner, and then you need a web link to your work, and then you send both of those in and they put that up onto Revolution Radio, and it's super affordable.
Yeah, it is. Archives too, because you're getting 24/7 normal 2 hour shows.
Yeah. And
Radio reaches more audiences than other forms because everybody likes to put it on just to hear in the background.
Oh, yeah, the drive by listeners. I'm even a drive by listener every now and then.
If
Well,
I
I
find
can't sit in front of the computers for 2 hours. I mean, I even get up and take a break like now, you know? So you two are at it. Go ahead, Lenny.
okay, she's going back to break. So, you know what, Lenny, one of the things that I really, consistently learn about soil and plants, and how, these systems in nature operate, and learning how to, create them for nature to help nature, is that everything that gives something gets something back in return, um, in nature. So there's abundance. There's the giving and the receiving, and it's pretty equal. And one of the native guys that I went on this native walk with this summer, said that he does cultural restoration for a tribe, up in Grass Valley area, I think. Uh-oh.
uh-oh,
Oh,
uh-oh,
it was a link that just went up. Sorry. We're okay. Um, it just flashed on my screen. So
It's that.
what one of the things that he said is that when these areas become climax areas, and we were doing a walkthrough with this area that's called a small climax forest up there in the Grass Valley area. And he said, once it becomes a climax area, all those plants and beings and everything and insects will push out and eliminate what is destructive. And because they sometimes need the destructive plants. This is totally a Steiner thing, really. They need the plants, even the destructive ones, to rebuild the soil and the waterways and whatever else that they need in order for that area to build itself back up. But the plants that are not super sustainable and are usy, or aggressive or other things that they may have used to work together, they will actually the area will eradicate them on their own. And then it's 100% sustainable. Those areas don't need, people to go in there. They don't need anything else to go in there, and it regulates itself.
Yeah, in the Pacific Northwest, those climax areas in conifer forests are about 300 years old. And when you got a big fire, they were almost immune to the fire because the fire couldn't get from the ground story up into the tops. But by having continuous logging, there's a pathway, a ladder that takes fire straight up and burns the forest hotter. But it's funny that after you've had a forest fire, the first plants back are like ceanothus and juniper, and the ones that can live without drawing too many nutrients from the soil. And then when they pass on, other plants can use the nutrients that they had gathered as the basis for their stock of nutrients. So, in
Mm-hmm.
doing the biodynamics like you do, there's an awful lot of inorganic chemistry that can potentially be done by taking monoatomic salts based on iron, cobalt, zinc, and other silica, selenium, things that plants need,
Oh,
but don't
selenium's
necessarily
important.
need in abundance.
Where do
And
you find organic selenium?
there were places in California where the selenium was natural and it was excessive, so that there was almost too much selenium for the animals on it. But I do know from raising goats that we had to supplement with selenium to keep them from getting white muscle disease. And
Well,
so I would be very much interested in taking an approach that combined the best of chemistry and the best of biodynamics and hybridizing that approach and
Well, yeah,
seeing
there are people that are doing that
but you got
in
to know the
Europe.
resources, where they're coming from, etc.
Well, another thing too is a lot of the biodynamic preparations that we make, you know, um, because the animals that we slaughter and we will use some of their parts were raised on the biodynamic land that is nutrient rich, all kinds of nutrient, because that's what you plant your whole farm on, is to create this perfect balance, right? That you don't need to add anything or take away. But and then you add these herbal plants into it as well, into some of these animal parts, and then you do things like submerge them underwater. So for example, we'll talk about oak bark preparation, right? And oak bark is taken, you have this little hand thing that you don't break the cambium or anything, and you take the pieces of the very scrape off the outside of the bark, and then you grind it up, and then you put it in water that's gone through a flow form or been stirred, and then you mix it together into a thick paste, and then you take the cow head and you strip it of all the meat and the skin and everything else, and you basically pull out the brain. And then you put the oak bark prep into the brain cavity, and then you put a plug in it. And so what happens is that the oak bark actually binds with the calcium and builds this calcium relationship because it's in the cow head for a year. And then what you do is you teach the oak bark also on top of that about the water. And so you take that cold cow head with the oak bark in the brain. I know this sounds totally like witchcraft. I get that.
Sounds fair to me.
Yeah, it's a totally
Utilization. I mean,
this
come
is
on.
this is why I liked biodynamics, because it was very shamanistic, you
It
know.
just makes sense, though, doesn't it?
Well, you have
Doesn't
to
it
teach
does?
things about each other, you know, and so you have to put them into, a package. So anyway, so what you do is you put the oak bark, and the oak bark, has relationships with all this other stuff in the bones as well. And then you teach it about water. So then you put the cow head in a creek, that's probably half empty. And it's fall time that you do this, and then it goes through winter, and in spring the creek rises and kind of goes above its head. And then you wait like a whole year, and then you harvest it. You take it out of the river. I mean, the cowhead smells disgusting. It's just unbelievably disgusting. And then you pull the oak bark out of it. And then what you do with it is that, you share it or you keep it so that you can use oak bark. And then you stir it. We bind it, structure it into the water, infuse it for an hour, stirring back and forth. And then you filter out the hard parts. I'd put those back into my compost, but then you can spray the oak bark preparation on everything. And so it teaches it and helps it with a lot of these bone minerals, and really heavy in calcium. And then it teaches the land, the soil, and the microbes and the plants about drought and about flooding. So the plants have, and the microbes can be more prepared for those kinds of things to happen, so that the plants survive, so your crops can survive through as much as possible. And so that's something that you would spray, on your soil and seeds, and then maybe even your young plants.
Sounds like a
Um,
business to me.
Well, I mean, biodynamics is, well, it's sad because I think Rudolph Steiner College, most of it closed and is an autistic center now in Sacramento. So I think the only other big college for biodynamics, or, you know what I mean, for Steiner stuff, I think is the Pfeiffer now, which is I think in New York. But there are a whole bunch of, biodynamic movements. We have BDANC, which is Biodynamic Northern California Association, and they are, still working. But anyway, that's why another reason I want to teach biodynamics is so that the average person can understand what we have to do here.
Well, that's what your webinar is going to be. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Lynn.
Can you explain how the information exchange works for biodynamics? Because there's a lot of information being passed by the different things that go into these composite mixtures.
Well,
What do
I
you
guess
mean?
it would depend on terrain then.
Well, it
But
was
I,
real
I got a great story.
So I'm not really sure what your question is, Lenny.
Oh, go away, JR. Got these men
What?
in
So
their
what was
effing
your question
toys.
about the information exchange?
I want to know how the theory behind how different pieces of the biology can exchange information in the compost and the soils so that the stuff that we, for instance, made the biodynamic compost on Peter's land, we used all stuff that came off the land so that the information that we could get from using the compost was more directed to the location.
Well, okay, so that's a specialty of mine.
Okay.
So I
Wait a
took,
minute, you didn't
I,
hear my woo.
oh,
Woo. Yeah,
well, no,
Bridget, I
because
really appreciate that you're doing what you're doing.
so what I did was got all the biodynamic. I found out that I was a biodynamic soil composting nut. Okay, I went there for totally different reasons. And then what happened was is that when I came to Reno, I didn't have biodynamic farms, and I didn't have a cow to slaughter to take parts from to make the medicines, and I didn't have a place to bury the medicines, because you make them all times of the year. I mean, I could buy them from Harold Hoven or other BB members off their land, but their land's California. I'm in Nevada. So yeah, did I use California preparations that were made locally, like, all the different kinds of preparations and stuff like that to help people's soil in Nevada? Yes, I did. It worked super great. But what I found was that also I was going to different people's lands, And I was having to look at their land, and I was having to assess it, and I was having to try to figure out how to make up medicines. Now, I could have had people mail me, from wherever while I was on those lands preparations, but those preparations are not for that land. So I started working with this whole other mechanism and system of how I could utilize as much possible information I can about biodynamic composting, but yet also bring in elements to make a hard drive database, which is the original compost that I make on the land to teach people. And that's the hard drive database that has all the data in it. So it's going to have deer poop. Deer poop has a lot of stuff in it. The deer poop, if it's fresh, it contains like what the water conditions are, what the environmental conditions are, what the animals are eating, how they're feeling, just a lot of stuff. That's a lot of information to put into a microorganism compost and have microorganisms break all this stuff down. So you have maybe nettles, you have dandelions, you have a lot of these other kinds of things you can pick, you can put in there from the environment. You can take, water from different areas to put in there. And you just start collecting as much stuff. Then, all your used food, if you have dead animals, you can put it in there. Everything. Put everything into the compost, right? And then you just build it and you let the microbes eat it like a stomach, and it becomes, I call it the inoculation for that area, which means that I can take it once it's all developed, and I put mushrooms in it. I'm really heavy on the mushrooms because I want that mycelium in it. And that's why I don't expose my compost to any kind of light. I don't expose it to heat. I don't expose it to any of these things that is going to steal that energy and information out of it. I don't let my compost cook. I keep them nice and alkaline and cool and moist. I don't let them go to the acid side. So when I create this medicine, so that's kind of like a lot of that work is mine about creating these databases so that I can spray all those different components on that land have something to add to it. And then when you create it and you make it and you put it together and then you use it as a spray or you use it in the soil or you use it, it's like an inoculation for the land, and it has all the information contained in it. Now, when you turn that compost, when eventually you're going to harvest, you call it turning, and so you're going to take off the top part because it still hasn't been really chewed down and eaten enough, and that becomes the base of the one next to it, the starting point of the new one. I only will harvest that soil that's in there, as needed, or and some of that soil is going to go into the new compost, and I'm going to be adding more stuff to that one. So there's going to be lots more information that comes in, but I've, like a yeast, like an old, sourdough yeast that's 400 years old. I'm making the original inoculation, right? And then it's added to it, kind of like a laboratory.
Yeah,
Kind
it
of
was good that we got a chance to make two different composts, because in being able to do the same thing over right away, it reinforced what needed to be done. And a lot of good things grew out of the compost areas. I didn't get to do a lot of spreading because we haven't been growing a lot there, but it'll still be there whenever it comes time to dig. And I imagine that since it's in the middle of where the mullein and the St. John's wort are growing, there's going to be a lot of good herb when I get back into Oregon, waiting
yeah.
for
Well,
spring
and just
season.
think, it's just going to keep off gassing, into different
Okay.
areas.
I've got something to say about what we were talking about earlier. I saw this great video of this guy. Oh, where was he? And the product that they sold was like olives or something, and they weren't making enough money, and only olive trees were growing, and the land went fallow. So he found the gosh, I've been thinking of this plant since forever. Mangrove? No. Oh, it's the big ficus tree, banyan tree. Jesus. Banyan trees that actually created the tropics back into where their soil got rebirth within not even 20 years. So banyan trees, they produce, they do to every environment. They're one of the strongest trees ever. So I'm
Yeah.
just putting that out there because that might be what a lot of people need to think of doing. And now the temper zones are really different too, but what is the same anywhere? Nothing.
Yeah, well, I've never really met a bad plant or tree in
Yeah, me
environments.
neither.
In
But
environments, it's all about just getting some soil and planting stuff and then allowing nature to take over.
okay, but I'm going to tell you something.
What?
I had an herbal business, community garden, the whole 9 yards in St. Pete, Florida. Okay, now envision that. That's on the water. And so my compost was a completely different kind of structure. Plus, by putting the heat to it, it made it faster. But I always had the fungal because, again, there was a cold one. Just like you said, because that's what helps the moist, the cold, to produce that living fungal. But to break this stuff down, I used a fast heat and it came out gorgeous. My earthworms were pencil size. That's how nice that compost was.
Yeah,
And
we don't. Yeah, the biodynamic compost, there's like nothing else like it. And it's really hard for people to really kind of understand that. And I used to do like the heat method too, but the problem is that heat method, anything that goes over, it's like they say you shouldn't eat food that's cooked over 90 degrees because it will kill anything of nutritional value or the microbes in it, which microbes are something that you seriously
oh,
need.
that's rather interesting. I never heard that.
Yeah, that's why, a lot of people heal on raw food because they don't cook their food.
Right.
Because it'll still have the nutrient, and if there are any microbes left, they might get some of those. But you lose a lot of your microbes if it gets over the compost gets over a certain temperature, and one of the big things is utilizing the element. We have to realize there's all these other forces too that are trying to steal stuff from our compost. There's air and wind, right, that absorb a lot of the stuff right off the top if it gets too hot, and it has to be kind of opened up. So we lose a lot of the alchemical forces inside because the air will steal it. Water to flooding and things running off out of the compost. The type of freestanding compost we use, um, you know, stand up really well against lots of rain, and won't be, battered by it at all. It'll still can stay covered with the straw covering, and everything inside will be perfectly fine. So we try to keep it at like a constant, state, like a stomach. And then
Oh,
they're usually about 5 feet tall, and they're about 5 feet long and maybe like 4 feet wide. And then we
right.
encapsulate them with straw to protect them and create like a stomach membrane, like the membrane. So it's a fast, freestanding digester.
Okay. So, by all means, I also, because I had a nursery, I would use a thing called the soilless mix, which was straight peat, but it was usually Canadian coarse, and vermiculite, perlite, and then builder's sand. And it would work and it would do its job, and I never had to add fertilizer to it. Of course, if it was a big container, I'd add compost, but that's a whole different story because I would go through hundreds and hundreds of plants. It wasn't just, a whole simple thing because they were purchasing my cactus and succulents and herbs. So,
Well,
uh,
yeah, just on
wait, I
biodynamic.
want to finish this
Okay.
before I forget because the Canadian sphagnum peat is from peat bogs. And that's part of leaving the CO2 out too, leaving. We're getting gas from them going into the bogs because what holds the CO2 in but the bogs, right? And if they're open and being sprayed with chemtrails too, because I'm not seeing the plants growing the way they're supposed to be growing. Like even because I have the soilless mix, and even though I'm adding earthworm casings, none of them seem happy anymore. And so I think, like what you were saying, if you had a thing of drops that you could stick into a gallon container and feed them.
Well, that's what the biodynamic compost does that I make, is that you make enough of it for whatever you need for your land and however many it transplants or whatever you need, because we never want to bring anything. The biggest thing is in Steiner's work, we don't bring anything in. We try to create a full circle ecological system on our lands to keep it from getting broke down by bringing bugs and other viruses into it from other things that we may buy from other places.
But you still need bugs. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the whole thing.
but that's what our compost does, is it actually conjures the microorganisms from under the ground up into the compost. And then we don't have to do anything. We just keep feeding it, and it will start to digest so rapidly on its own. And then from that compost, I use it for transplants or whatever else that I need to do, beds. And then also I use it as a compost tea. I also use it as a spray to spray the soil in the plants. Also, I've used it to spray the bases of trees, saturate them, to actually put microorganisms back into them to save old orchard trees. And I've created pastes from the compost, taking the compost, mixing it with clay, and a whole bunch of other stuff from the land, maybe some leaf debris or whatever else. And then I paste it onto the bottoms of the trees so all that stuff will absorb into it,
right,
and go to save its life. So the compost that I make is like, for everything, that so I don't have to buy anything. And then so that's kind of like what I do.
It makes more
what I
sense.
teach people how to do. And the first thing I teach people, what did the first thing I taught you, Lenny, when I came to your land?
Water everything.
Well, and compost, and water the crap out of the compost.
We'll always keep it moist. That's another reason why you would put it in the shade.
Oh, we don't put it in the shade. You can put it anywhere. You don't want to put biodynamic compost near a tree because they'll eat it all.
Well, it depends on what kind of tree you have. But I see what you're saying. You got a single, it's like the mother. So as you produce it out to whatever it is, that becomes the baby. So it'll create its own.
Yeah, and it's like and also you take part of it to put into the new compost, and so it lives on and on and on. So like Fred was this old man goat, and that had to be put down because he was old, and we put him into the compost. I have video of it, and we just kept building the compost around him until it surrounded him, and it digested him fairly fast.
Cool.
And so Fred will always be there, he'll always be making the land better.
With his eyeball looking at us.
No, oh my God.
She had to mute. Oh, that's funny.
No, and it was so funny because his head was so big, and the skull part, and it was the last thing to go on, and we could not get enough soil around it. So every time we'd water it and it would mash down, the eye would be looking up at us. So we're like, oh no, look, it's the one eye. They can see us. We're cracking all kinds of jokes trying to get his eye covered. It was kind of mental.
Yeah, it sounds a little mental, but that's okay. I get it.
It was pretty funny.
It is funny. It is funny.
And after Fred, then within a month, we had a mountain lion take care of 6 goats. And so we had to dispose of our goats.
Alrighty then.
Compost.
I want to thank you both. We got like 3 minutes left here. Pardon?
And help Revolution Radio. Support us.
Yes.
Yes, Revolution Radio. There's the donate click. And lots of good stuff going on. Bridgette, your show is on Wednesday at noon?